my friends, Savio, Tina, and various other people. And thank you for all the people who've come very specially for this lecture from South Goa and from other places. Very, very briefly, putting the Jews of Goa in its context of Indian Jews, but it's not a lecture on the Jews of India. I'll just whisk through that. And then, I got into the subject by our friend Anthony Iverfeld, and ever since we've edited this book together with scholars of Old Portuguese and scholars of the Inquisition. Basically, I put it together. So these are just a sample. I'm whizzing through the first bit. These are just a sample of the books that I've actually published, and I've been studying Indian Jews for half a century. So it's on Baghdadi Jews, on different Jews, Cochin Jews, everybody, the type of people that you've heard of. And this is very quickly where the Jews were settled in India. And today there's a new group in northeast India, Mizoram and Manipur. I won't speak about them, but they are actually going to come, 5,800 of them are actually going to come and live in Israel. But they're not on this map because they were never recognized as Jews in the past. And these are the Ben Israel of Maharashtra. Some of you may know them. And this is now Gaul, a place in the Konkani, which is north of here. And I keep thinking there must have been a connection. And this is the place where the Ben Israel ancestors claim that they were shipwrecked off the Konkani coast in the year 175 BCE. And on the side, is an oil presser. This was the, as it were, caste profession of the Ben Israel as pressers of oil, but they never pressed oil on the Sabbath. They were called Saturday oilmen. And in 1796, a lot of them had moved over to Bombay under the British and enlisted in the armed forces of the British. And the first synagogue that was actually established in Bombay was at the end of the 18th century by an officer called Samuel Ezekiel de Vega. I'm not giving a whole lecture on this, but I'm just giving you the major points. And they basically served in the British and afterwards with telegraphs and posts and various other ancillary occupations. And here is a more contemporary picture, which I think is gorgeous, showing that today the Ben Israel community is pretty small, maybe 3,000, and they have to do arranged marriages with Israeli Ben Israel because about 80,000 Ben Israel live in the state of Israel today. They moved there after Indian independence in 47, and the state of Israel was declared in 48, and gradually moved out. Of course, there was no anti-Semitism in India, and it didn't push them out. And then we have the more famous, in a way, Baghdadi Jews, the Sassoon dynasties. I also love this picture, so I put it in. It's well known. In the center is David Sassoon wearing his Arabian costumes, and on his on the side, on the left, is two of his sons. He had loads of them, 12. Elias Sassoon and Albert Sassoon, who was formerly known as Abdallah, and then became Sir Albert Sassoon with the British. And I think it's just a marvelous picture because one of his sons, they all have these names, Sassoon David, David Sassoon. So one of his sons was called Sassoon David, I think. And he's already wearing that British garb. So it's so typical of what happened to the Baghdadi Jews. And many of you will know the David Sassoon Library and Fort in Mumbai today. And I just put in the synagogue in Pune, which is very well known too, the Red Synagogue in Pune, just to show you the examples. And my book on the Baghdadi Jews in India is actually dedicated to General Jacob, a friend of my friend here, Roli Horowitz. And this is his house in Delhi. He was, as you know, in the past, governor of Goa. Now, The last group are also well-known, well-documented, although very small. They are the smallest Jewish community in the world, and they were 2,400 at the time of Indian independence. The Jews of Kochi, what we call Cochin Jews, and we see on the side what we call the Jew town and the Paradesi synagogue. Many of you may be familiar with this. And there were also what we call Malabari Jews. In the old days, we called them white and black. It's not politically correct anymore, so we call them Paradesi and Malabari. And this is the synagogue in Chenamangalam, which actually I was responsible for restoring. And now we come to Goa. That was a really quick thing just to put the Jews of Goa in its context, to show you that there's a lot of scholarship on the Jews of India, none, very, very little on the Jews of Goa. So I I organized a symposium at the Hebrew University, and I got together some outstanding scholars from different countries, from France, from Portugal, from India itself, from Goa, and from, actually there wasn't anybody else from Israel, I don't think, and we put together this symposium, and these are the people who contributed to it. I won't go over it because I'm rushing through a load of slides, and can you all see them all from there? Is it okay? So I'm doing a lecture synopsis. I like to do that so that it focuses all of us from Goa, and we'll talk about that. We're going to talk about the Portuguese Inquisition, and then we'll talk about Garcia de Orta, which everybody's heard of in Goa, but maybe some didn't realize his Jewish origins. And by the 18th century, the Jewish community had disappeared. So if you're saying, well, why didn't I know about this before? Well, you probably didn't have a Jewish community in Goa after the Inquisition. However, there are people who are claiming converso heritage here. And as you all know and suffer, Goa is a destination for Israeli backpackers. Next. The early history is extremely interesting. In the Bible, we have documentation of King Solomon with a fleet of ships from Tarshish going from Tyre down and from Sidon. These are images that I've managed to get before all the dreadful things that are going on in the Middle East. And I got this from Beirut even. And these are the fleet of ships that went down, probably came through Goa. And in the Book of Kings, which many of you may know, it says, once every 3 years the fleet of Tarshish would arrive, bringing gold, silver, ivory, apes, and peacocks. And these commodities are commodities which are known to have come from this area. And linguistically, linguists have identified words which are local words inside the Bible. They're not Hebrew or Semitic words. And so this is extremely interesting. It could be that there was an ancient settlement here. Now, many of you know, all of you know, the Church of St. Augustine in Panjim. And in recent years, some people... Old Goa, yeah, oh, sorry, yeah, Old Goa. And some of you may have been aware that it could have been an ancient, what we call mikveh, which is a ritual bath, a Jewish ritual bath. They go down a certain amount. There are 7 steps into the water. There's an underground system of ancient water channels which brings fresh spring water from the hills. And in fact, experts on these ritual baths have come out to Goa and claimed that these were the ancient ritual baths. And we have various scholars in Goa. Nicolau da Fonseca, in his book Historical and Archaeological Sketch of the City of Goa, who claims there were also synagogues in Ruan, I'll have to explain my, Dos Judeos in the city of Ela, which is identified with Goa. So many of you may have heard of the Geniza documents. I'm doing this very fast. I had the privilege of working and actually seeing these in the original. I had a fellowship in Cambridge University about 5 years ago, and I actually photographed these. It was so thrilling. These are the Judeo-Arabic trader letters of one who is very famous, and Amitav Ghosh has written about him as well in an ancient land. But he's called Ben Yiju, and he was a Jewish trader who lived in Mangalore for 17 years. And all these have been found in this trove of letters found in a synagogue in Egypt, in Cairo. They're called the Geniza documents. And these letters date to about 1130 of the 12th century. And the letter that I've actually photographed here mentions Mangalore. And they confirm the presence of Jewish merchants in Sindapore, believed to be in the Gopakatana Vase, have I said it right? Basin, here in Goa. It's a very exciting, thrilling thing to actually, I've read about them, but to actually see them is just amazing. And here is like a trader's packing list, and this was sent by Ben Yiju. There are 80 of these documents, and he says what he should put in his packing list, and he's writing to what do rice books and coconuts, and he's telling people what to bring from India. And they traded all the way up the Indian Ocean to Egypt. So here we have pictures that you may well be very familiar with these places. There's Divar Island, and I thank the people who came from Divar Island today, especially for this lecture. This one was photographed by Nihil Dveka, and there's also Sridhar near Bambolin. And many people believe in Goa that these were originally older synagogues of an ancient settlement here, pre-Portuguese. And many people, I'm not talking of one or two, but many people have been in touch with me saying that they believe their ancestors were of Jewish origin, but of course they converted to Roman Catholicism in the past. And in the discussion period, we can possibly hear from those people. And here we have this exciting photograph that I photographed in Lisbon. Many of you have been there. It's just the most marvelous sculpture I've ever seen of Vasco da Gama going out from Lisbon to India to basically conquer India and arrive in Goa. Now, it's interesting that there's some literature that Vasco da Gama himself was Jewish, which I don't know, there's no proof. But his interpreter, with a similar name, Gaspar da Gama, has basically been proven that he was a Jewish convert to Catholicism. In other words, he kept Roman Catholicism outwardly. He was an interpreter, a very manipulative man, and he was originally Jewish, or he practiced Judaism secretly, and that's Gaspar da Gama. And there's a lot of literature about him. Now, the Portuguese occupied Goa in 1510, and Afonso de Albuquerque conquered it from Bijapur Sultanate, marking the start of Portuguese presence. So we have a map of Old Goa, where this was explaining the settlement of Jews in Old Goa when the Portuguese arrived. It's a rather rare map. It's very, very interesting if you actually go into it, which obviously don't have time on a PowerPoint presentation. And then the Portuguese set up the administrative quarters of the Estado da India and transferred them from Kochi to Goa in 1530. So Jews had migrated from Portugal, fleeing the Inquisition, and had come to settle in Goa. St. Francisco Xavier, who was a foremost Jesuit apostle, whom you all know, wrote to King João III of Portugal that we need an inquisition in Goa, because many of those who used to live in Portugal, according to what he called the law of Moses, have to be now tried. But once the court of the Holy Office was set up in Goa in 1560, Jews in Goa found themselves also in trouble. They'd fled from Portugal. Some of them had moved on to the Ottoman Empire, Turkey, etc. And now they were in Goa, free place, wonderful freedom of expression, and now the Inquisition had come. There were 22 conversos from Goa and Cochin were actually tried and sent to Lisbon. And Inquisition trials only terminated in 1812. Now, they set up, as you know, in Old Goa, the Jesuits settled in St. Augustine complex, which is huge, as you know, and many pertain that this was on the site of a Jewish settlement area, and there was an old synagogue there. Many, many people think that. And the Archaeological Survey in Goa is very aware of it. So here, when I was here 11 years ago, I photographed the Jews' Road. I can never say the Rua dos Judeos, did I say it good? Judeos? Judeos. Anyway, I'll say it in English, the Jews' Road, with the ruins of St. Augustine on the right and St. Anthony's Chapel in front of us. And the synagogue was apparently, according to scholars in my book, which you can, by the way, is being sold out there in the book forum, the synagogue was at the end of the street left of St. Anthony's Chapel. And it's where this woman is actually on her way. She's walking down there. And now we come to this amazing figure, Donna Gracia. I don't know how many of you have heard of her. What's interesting is that in Israel, nobody's heard of Jews of Goa, but they've all heard of Donna Gracia. Why? Because after she left Goa, she went to reside in Tiberias by the Galilee Sea, and there's a whole museum there about her, not even mentioning Goa, which is incredible. So Donna Gracia was this amazing woman, born in 1510, and she married her uncle at 18, who was super rich, and he died in 1538. He was a creditor and close to King João II of Portugal. Now, she and her husband, who was her uncle, were both what we call conversos. Conversos are new Christians. They had been forcibly converted to Roman Catholicism, and if they didn't convert, they would be burnt at the stake. So basically, they were what we call conversos today. And when her husband died, she said, I'll take it over. I'll take over this enterprise. And she only employed conversos, other people who were secretly Jews. They would light candles on Friday night in secret, but outwardly they were Catholics. And these included various famous people like the Mendes brothers, Francisco and Diogo, spice traders, and other people. And she ran these fleets from Goa. In 1992, she was recognized, and there was a stamp in her. Here, this stamp is from 1992, and these armadas were funded by the Crown of Portugal. And these fleets, these armadas went regularly from Portugal to India, principal destination, Goa. And here they had, before the Inquisition clamped down on them, they had communal prayers, they had synagogues, and they lived together in the Jewish street. And they were the main carriers of the spice trade between Europe and Asia during the 16th century. And it was on the basis of the monsoons, which I think I don't have to explain to people here. Another very interesting figure was Garcia de Orta, whom we'll come to. Meanwhile, as I mentioned, St. Francis Xavier requested from the King George III of Portugal to establish and really set up the Inquisition. And so here is Donna Gracia running these huge armadas of ships. And at the same time, he's saying, no, we have to clamp down on the Jews. He doesn't realize, perhaps, that she's originally Jewish. And if you go into Panjim today, at least it was 11 years ago, you go into the local museum, and you see the Inquisition table. I was actually surprised it was so small. I thought it would be bigger. But anyway, they write that was where they tried Jews, and if they were found guilty, they were burnt at the stake. And this is the Goa Inquisition, and they describe it. This is Goan State Museum. The Inquisition may be described as an ecclesiastical tribunal for the suppression of heresy and punishment of heretics. Now, I want to point out that the Jews weren't necessarily the target. Many thousands of Hindus were forcibly converted to Roman Catholicism in addition. But in addition, Jews were. And though the first demand for the establishment of the Inquisition was made by St. Francis Xavier, the Inquisition was actually only established in 1560, which gave Donna Gracia a lot of time to run her armadas back and forth to the east and back again. So some of the scholars in my book have written and can read Old Portuguese, which I confess I can't. And these are Inquisition papers from the Portuguese National Archives, all of which relate to Jews and their crimes. Some of their crimes were like they eat Jewish food on Friday night and things like that. And they had a stew, which we don't eat, but they eat, and things like that. It's all very, very interesting. And here is a book that was produced in 1654, which I found, of architectural drawings of the Inquisition in Portugal and in India. And they show where the Jews live, and that's where I got the map from, and what they were doing and how many there were, and so on. And now we come to this figure, all of you have heard of him, Garcia de Orta. He was the advisor to the king. The person who wrote about him in my book is called Palmira Fontes da Costa. She's originally Goan, she's at Cambridge University. And she claims, I don't know whether it's true, but this is what she writes in my book, and I can't contest her, that is his signature on the top right. And she claims that he was signing in Hebrew. If you twist it round, it's in Hebrew. And if you look at it normally, it's like Portuguese or Latin letters. I don't really see it, but that's what she writes. And she claims that this is true. And she's a very fine scholar, very, very fine scholar. So Garcia de Orta was a physician. He was born in 1501. And he lived in India from 1534, before the Inquisition. And the king either knew or didn't know, the King of Portugal knew or didn't know that he was Jewish. And he was outwardly Catholic. He was a converso. And he and his wife was also a converso. They only married each other. And in 1548, he brought out his mother and his two sisters to Goa. Now, as you know, he was a botanist, and his major published work was published in 1563, and you all know the Garcia de Orta garden in Panjim, Old Goa, and Panjim, got it right, okay, Panjim, and the thing was that he was never claimed as a Jew, and he died as outwardly as a Catholic, but his sister Katerina, his sister was tried by the Inquisition, and she was burnt at the stake in Goa. I'll come to it in a second, wait a second, here, at the new pillory, which many of you may know. Now, my pictures are old. It's before this whizzing highway that I saw coming from the airport. But these are genuine pictures that I photographed. And she was burnt on the stake. She was tied to this pole and burnt on the stake as a Jew, a Jewess. It's absolutely incredible. And yet her brother, because he was the physician of the king, he was let off and he was allowed to sort of live his life and stay on. Now, the really crazy thing is that after she was burnt at the stake, in 1580, the Portuguese decided, yes, well, he must have been Jewish. So they exhumed his bones, took them to Lisbon, I don't know whether you all know this, and they tried his bones and found him guilty of being a Jew, and then they burnt his bones. Now, in Goa, he was never really recognized until the 20th century, which is really very strange, in my opinion, strange. By 1946, they were proud of him, and this postal stamp was produced in Goa, in India. And in 1971, there's the Portuguese banknote with his picture on it. And that's Caterina. And so it really exemplifies how the Portuguese regarded the Jews and the Inquisition, because they were willing to shut their eyes if somebody was useful to them, and yet they were willing to kill the sister because she was of no use to them. So it's really an extraordinary situation. Now, the Portuguese period, although the Inquisition went on till 1812 in a formal manner, officially, the Dutch really took over from in Goa, as you all know. And the man most instrumental for the Dutch takeover, what I call the Dutch takeover, is Jan Huygen van Linschoten. And I love this picture, it's so nice. But anyway, he was a Dutch trader and historian. And he was born in 1563. And he spent 5 years in Goa at the end of the 16th century, 1583 to 1588. And he served as a secretary to the Portuguese Archbishop of Goa, called João Vicente da Fonseca. He had the very high-level position, which gave him unprecedented access to top-secret charts, nautical maps, and logs, which he meticulously copied, gathering data on trade routes, currents, the monsoon currents, and regional politics. He was a spy. He also documented local life, including detailed accounts of the Goa market and social hierarchies. And one of his more famous pictures is this Dutch depiction, which he did, of the Inquisition in Goa. It's an absolutely magnificent picture. And if you look into it, you see slaves that they're selling in the market. And also, some people who are expert in this artwork have also identified people whom they think are Jewish, that they are trying to recruit or at the time of the Inquisition. It's a completely fascinating picture. Some have got clothes on, and the ones without clothes are lower class and don't have, and are often picked up by the Inquisition officials and taken off. In the Netherlands, he published his findings in what's called the Itinerario in 1596. And this work, this published work, provided the first roadmap for other European powers to reach the East Indies without relying on Portuguese pilots. Don't forget Vasco da Gama and Gaspar da Gama, the interpreter. They were now less useful. By documenting and leaking Portuguese navigational secrets, he effectively ended their monopoly on the spice trade. And don't forget the Geniza documents, where they were talking about trade from the 12th century, spice trade from the south right up to Egypt. And basically, he paved the way for British and Dutch colonization in Asia. So what happened to the Jewish community? In time, it dissolved. We've said that many Jews fled. They just fled. They sought refuge in countries where the long arm of the Inquisition did not extend. A few went down to Cochin, and we have Inquisition records of 22 people in Cochin. It's very few. And they set up the Paradesi synagogue, which I showed you, in 1568. But even Cochin wasn't really immune to the Inquisition, and many people fled to other countries, the Ottoman Empire, and even back to Europe, Italy and other places, Livorno. Others continued to work in the employ of the Portuguese as merchants, advisors, interpreters, or even spies. Many of these Jews, these conversos, were also spies. They commonly interacted, and so these people commonly, the Jews, actual Jews who hadn't yet converted, commonly interacted with the conversos. And in some of the Inquisition papers, the Jews are tried and said, you spoke to so-and-so, and we know that he's a converso. So the Jews knew who the conversos were, the conversos knew who the Jews were, and eventually many people actually converted and became what we call new Christians. At the end of the 18th century, the Inquisition started to die out, but it was only officially abolished, as I pointed out, in 1812. The new Christians or conversos continued outwardly to practice Roman Catholicism, while retaining inwardly, inside the community, many Jewish customs. In time, they began to assimilate with the local population, which is inevitable. Although there are people in Goa who still say they only intermarried with the people whom they knew in the past were conversos. And some of their descendants recall to this day the rituals that their ancestors had practiced. When I first came to Goa, I'm embarrassed to tell you when it was, in the 1970s, I met people who, in the Jew Street near St. Augustine, who definitely had names, Jewish names, and admitted that their ancestors were Jewish. Today, I actually came back in 2014. I've been a few times since. I couldn't actually find those people anymore, but they definitely were there when I first came. So, Goa in the 21st century, the Inquisition bell was removed and is still prominently displayed at Our Lady of the Immaculate Conception Church in Panjim. I mean, that's the major thing that you see when you arrive in the city. And considering that other European countries like Portugal have now apologized, essentially, for the Inquisition, it's extraordinary that the bell, the Inquisition bell, is still there. That's my personal opinion. Of course, we have backpackers in the 21st century, and we have what you may know, the name Chabad, these religious Jews who entertain Israeli backpackers on the Sabbaths, and they all meet there, and Israelis are always very happy to meet other young Israelis. So that's Goa in the 21st century. It has nothing really to do with the early settlement of Jews in Goa, or the period of the Inquisition. However, it is interesting that there is a kind of renaissance of different people in the 21st century. So with that, I will terminate, and I whizzed through it, and obviously there will be many, many questions, and I'd also like to hear from one or two people who are claiming some sort of allegiance to the Jewish presence in Goa. Thank you very much.